Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 31st of March. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily catch-up of European news and context live here on Euronews. Coming up, Donald Trump says he will, quote, obliterate Iran's power stations if the regime does not agree to his peace terms, quote, shortly. Dejan has dismissed the demands as, quote, excessive, unrealistic and irrational. We'll get the latest from Euronews' Persian news desk. And all eyes on Lebanon, where 2 more UN peacekeepers have been killed in Israeli strikes, bringing the death toll to over 1,200 in Israel's ongoing attacks, according to Lebanon's health ministry. Over 1.2 million people have meanwhile fled their homes. We'll speak exclusively to the Lebanese Justice Minister. But first, finance and energy ministers from the world's 7 most industrialised nations say they're ready to take, quote, any necessary measures to stabilise energy markets, but they stop short of announcing concrete action. France, which holds the rotating presidency, says the conflict in the Middle East is already having economic and financial repercussions with possible inflationary effects. For more, we're joined here on set by our Europe editor-in-chief, Maria Tadeo, who's been covering G7 meetings for years. Good morning, Maria. So what did you make of yesterday's talks?
Yes, well, Maeve, look, we can talk about the G7, whether it's relevant or not relevant, whether now it's the G6 without the United States. Can you look at the global economy without India and China? Of course, those are very valid debates. But when the G7 meets, especially in the context of a crisis, that is important. And it also sends a signal to the world that they will take action together. And yesterday in that meeting, which was hosted by France with the rotating presidency, the G7 agreed, quote, and hopefully we can put it up on the board, that they will take all the necessary actions to intervene in this energy market to preserve the stability and the security of a very volatile energy global market. Now, at this point, we've seen that oil prices, Brent crude yesterday touching $150 a barrel. We've now had practically 4 weeks of oil hovering around $100 a barrel. Obviously, that has enormous implications for the global economy. The G7 reiterated yesterday that they will take and are ready to take measures. They will do so in a coordinated manner. And they also urged the countries around the world should not restrict oil exports. Now, all of that is a strong message, you could argue. The issue coming out of that meeting is that there were no specific actions and there were no concrete measures that were announced. So in a way, it was, yes, all words and no actions. Remember, just a few weeks ago, the International Energy Agency agreed to release a massive strategic reserve of oil. 400 million barrels enter the global economy. That was not the case yesterday. There was no indication that will happen anytime soon before the reassurance with, yes, we'll take actions, but it's unclear what they will look like. And then, of course, Maeve, there's a big question around the focus point of this crisis, which is the Strait of Hormuz, which remains shut. 20% of the global oil transits through that waterway. It's unclear whether it will reopen. And to that extent, there's also a big question now in terms of the military operation. Is this weeks or will it be months? And then this overall theme, which is the U.S. preparing for a ground invasion of Iran, certainly when it comes to Karg Island, which of course homes the oil terminals of Iran. So a lot of that means uncertainty, volatility that feeds inevitably into the market and prices.
And a lot of nervousness, of course, in this town, and the EU contemplating their own measures too.
Well, yes. And look, when you look at the EU, there's 2 ways this can go. You can look at the national measures, which usually means a government will say, look, at this point, I got to cut VAT, taxes on electricity bills, on energy bills for households. They could also put in forward subsidies. That the same could apply for industries. The issue with the EU is that not every country has the same capacity. They do not have the same fiscal room to put forward measures. The other point which is relevant, however, is the EU measures. We know that they've looked at things like a windfall tax. They've also looked at things that could look at, buy-in in common, bulk buy-in, but also very relevant. Yesterday, the Commission, in a letter which we have here, is now urging member states, and this is very relevant, to also put in place demand-saving measures. This means, of course, that you try to tackle this issue through the demand, the use of energy. That could also mean, look, in this Easter break, don't get on a plane, maybe drive less, and some interesting numbers also coming in with the EU now estimating that the bill, just the bill in additional cost of fossil fuels, is 13 billion euros. So obviously that leads to a big question about stagflation, lower growth and more inflation.
Indeed, Maria Shea, thank you so much for all those details. And of course, you can read more about all that on our website, Euronews.com. And just in case you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by that update, our Jakob Yanis has been taking a look at what individual EU countries are doing to address this immediate crisis.
The war in Iran might seem far away, but its oil is not. For European drivers, the pain at the pump is very real, with some countries seeing price spikes of over 30%. So if you are curious how European governments are stepping in to help, let's look at different strategies together. Spain went big, rolling out a €5 billion package and slashing VAT on motor fuels from 21% down to 10%. And Madrid claims this will reduce petrol prices by around 30 euro cents per litre. And Poland followed with fuel VAT dropping from 23% to just 8%, saving drivers roughly the equivalent of 30 euro cents. Crucially, Warsaw is also introducing price controls. Hungary also opted for strict price controls, capping fuel prices. But there is a catch. It only applies to vehicles with Hungarian number plates to stop cross-border fuel tourism. And Germany and Austria are taking a regulatory route. Berlin is pushing a rule allowing petrol stations to raise prices only once a day at noon, while Vienna limits hikes to 3 times a week. And in France, the state has avoided massive tax cuts, relying instead on corporate giants like Total Energies to voluntarily cap prices. So who would actually benefit? Well, European citizens could, providing oil companies do not simply absorb the tax differences. And Italy, for instance, is already threatening to sanction companies trying to inflate margins. And you see, for European politicians, spending public money is an expensive move. But there is almost no public appetite to join the US and Israel in active conflict. And your reporters saw this pushback at the recent G7 summit. Despite Washington's pressure to immediately secure the Strait of Hormuz, Europe offered a firm reality check. They will help protect the critical waterway, but only after the war in Iran ends. So until then, perhaps consider using a bike. Like Mark Rutte.
Now, moving on, the European Union has condemned a decision by Israel's parliament to pass a law making the death penalty by hanging a reality for all Palestinians convicted in military courts. In a draft statement exclusively seen by Euronews this morning, the EU says, quote, capital punishment is a violation to the right to life. This as Israel continues their attacks on southern Lebanon in what now is being called an invasion. For The View from Beirut, Euronews' editor Maria Tadeo spoke exclusively to the Lebanese Justice Minister Adel Nazar.
We condemn, obviously, all the attacks and in particular also all the ground attacks and the occupation of our territory. And one has to understand that occupying a territory will never solve the problems. The only way to solve the problems when two countries are in a situation of conflict is to go into negotiation. The occupation of territory is obviously condemned, and we cannot accept this statement.
And Minister, on that note, going back to the Israeli Prime Minister, yesterday he said that Israel had managed to almost eradicate Hezbollah, but residues of it still exist. And the situation in the north of Israel has to fundamentally change. You talk about occupation. What do you think Israel has in mind?
I cannot speculate on what Israel has in mind. It's obvious that Israel had a past of attacks against Lebanon, and Lebanon is suffering from such attacks, and there was huge destructions, a lot of killed persons, injured and displaced persons. Now we are facing a displacement of more than 1 million inhabitants. So the situation is dramatic in terms of human rights, in terms of humanitarian situation, and the government with a little resources, very limited resources, is facing a dramatic situation. This being said, this being said, we are also fully aware that we have an internal problem, and we don't like and we refuse to make it as a problem that is being raised by Israel, but it is a problem that we are raising ourselves, which is the fact that Hezbollah is keeping a military infrastructure, and this is against the Lebanese government's will. It is against the law, and the position of the government is to take all the steps required to put an end to this military let's say, infrastructure that is being used. If we make a small analysis, one will see that this is being used as if Lebanon was a military base in favor of Iran, and we refuse this also.
And to that extent, I spoke with your prime minister 2 months ago, who said that he would not allow Hezbollah to drag Lebanon into a war directly with Israel. Nonetheless, you talk about occupation. Obviously, you also know there's now concerns that this is heading for an invasion of Lebanon. So how do you get out of this? What can you do internally, but also externally?
We are fully aware that our position is very difficult, because in one hand there are the Israeli attacks, and on the other hand there is Hezbollah undermining the state. We are aware that practically, in order to be able to conduct efficient negotiations, we have to hold the decision of war and peace, and not to have a parallel organization undermining the state. On the other hand, it is also obvious that we cannot accept that our territory be used as a target by Israel, the way Lebanon is being targeted. So we understand that we have these two difficult issues on the table. Iran is making a direct interference in Lebanon's internal policy, and is contributing to undermine the state. We have taken clear decisions in this respect in the government, irrevocable decisions. The first one is concerns the monopoly of the force. The second is to declare the weapons of Hezbollah as being against the law. And courts are starting to apply this to any person holding weapons, including fighters from Hezbollah. So this is on the internal aspect. And on the external aspect, the President of the Republic has launched the idea of negotiations, to have negotiations being conducted under a format to be agreed upon in order to stop the war between that Israel launched against Lebanon.
And meanwhile, the strikes continue between Israel and Iran, with reports of explosions and blackouts last night in Tehran and fears of an oil spill. For the latest, we can cross now to Euronews Lyon and bring in the head of our Persian news desk. That's Babak Kamyar. Good morning, Babak. So with now over 1 month of war, from the information that you can and your team can verify coming out of Iran, how are people doing there, and what is the situation on the ground?
Listen, Maeve, despite more than a month of war with significant casualties and damage, daily life has not completely collapsed. Internet access has been largely cut off since the beginning of the war. In most cases, people are effectively disconnected from the outside world. There are no major food shortages so far, but financial pressure is intense. Many people have lost their income and prices have surged. For now, life continues. You still see people in restaurants exercising and children playing, but always under the shadow of war. For many Iranians, explosions, drones, and fighter jets overhead has become part of everyday life. Some residents have chosen not to leave cities like Tehran, not only because few places feel truly safe, but also due to fears of looting, especially as attacks on police stations have weakened local security in some areas. In the past 2 days, electricity cuts have been reported in several parts of the country. In most cases, power was restored after a short time. However, it remains unclear how the situation would evolve if major energy infrastructure or power plants were directly targeted. What is certain is that any large-scale damage to these facilities would be costly and time-consuming to repair, which potentially serious consequences for daily life.
And Babak, it looks like there's no end in sight to this war and no chance now for diplomacy. What is the Iranian regime saying?
Well, it is still unclear how much of the current rhetoric reflects real intent and how much is strategic bluffing. What is clear, however, is that Iranian officials are publicly maintaining a firm position and continue to warn of retaliation. Iran faces a significant military imbalance compared to the United States and Israel. However, analysts note that its geography, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, gives Tehran room to respond through asymmetric means, potentially targeting shipping routes or regional assets. Senior officials have reinforced this message. Parliament Speaker dismissed report of progress in talk as wishful thinking, saying Tehran was waiting for arrival of American troops on the ground. This is they are going to punish their regional partners forever.
OK, Babak Kamyar, thank you so much for that update there from Lyon. Now, moving on with the Iran war showing, as you heard, no signs of slowing down. The US is now allegedly considering redirecting some of Ukraine's military aid towards the Middle East. This after President Zelensky concludes a trip to the Gulf in search of financial support. Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers are gathering in Kyiv today to mark the grim anniversary of the Buta massacre, when hundreds of Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war were murdered by Russian forces. For more on this, we're joined here on set by our Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Vakalina. Good morning, Sasha. Just tell us, what are the expectations for this meeting today in Kyiv?
The European Union foreign ministers are in Ukraine's capital to show their support on this very emotional day for Ukraine. The 31st of March marks 4 exact years since the liberation of Bucha. This is, of course, Kyiv's neighborhood that was among the first ones to be occupied, but also the first ones to be liberated, showing for the first time the proof of the atrocities of the Russian army. Now, unfortunately, the EU ministers can show this support, but cannot really prove it because all the Ukraine decisions remain blocked. This is the 90 billion euros loan. This is the new sanctions against Russia and all the steps of the EU accession for Ukraine. Announcing the meeting in Kyiv, Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, said that indeed he will be welcome to Gladka, Kallas and the EU foreign ministers in Kyiv. We also discussed the EU's support for Ukraine, pressure on Russia and efforts to achieve peace and protect long-term stability in Europe. The key word here, Maeve, is discuss and not decide.
And meanwhile, Sasha, we're seeing the Europeans facing a brand new energy crisis, whereas, Moscow's benefiting from higher crude oil prices and also sanctions relief. Fill us in.
Yeah, indeed. But at the same time, there have been several Ukrainian drone attacks against Russia's oil and energy infrastructure. Kyiv is continuing its campaign attacking Russia's money-making machine, of course, something that is financing Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to the reporters in the WhatsApp chat on Monday, confirmed that even some of Ukraine partners approached Kyiv asking to slow down. And this is when he said, first of all, we are not simply carrying out strikes. I want to remind everyone, we are responding if Russia is ready not to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, we will not respond against this. Russia knocked out Ukraine's civilian infrastructure during the winter, leaving millions of Ukrainians without water, heating and electricity for weeks, Maeve.
OK, Sasha Vakalina, thank you so much for that update. And of course, for more on that meeting, you can visit Euronews.com throughout the day. But that does bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. For all of our viewers in Malta today, happy Freedom Day. And to the rest, thank you so much for tuning in. As I said, download Euronews app or visit our website for more news and context on all the developing stories that we're covering for you here at Euronews. Take care. Thanks for tuning in and see you very soon here on Euronews.